print this article when you say, John Harbaugh is a wanted man in Baltimore. It's implied that he's wanted for his heinous crimes against the 2013 to 2017 cheating fans out of success with his coordinator selections over the years, and illegal use of timeouts, challenges. But would you believe that teams outside of Baltimore view John Harbaugh as a wanted man to coach their teams? Thanks to some great sleuthing by Sarah Ellison of BaltimoreRavens.com, it appears Ian Rappaport of NFL Network has been fielding a few calls from other teams in regards to John Harbaugh's availability. Per Ellison's LFW, actually, there were people interested in John Harbaugh, Rappaport says in the video below. I had people reach out to me from other teams saying, are the Ravens going to move on from John Harbaugh? I'm like, no. Okay, I can see where that's going. I think both Harbaughs were in demand.
I know John Harbaugh would be a really strong candidate if he was ever fired by the Ravens, which he's not going to be. You can see the video from the Rich Eisen Show's Twitter below. I'm sure he said that because he was getting interest from some.
But contrary to his confidence in Harbagh's presence in Baltimore, Eisen played a bit of devil's advocate, lending to the logic behind teams asking the NFL Insider for info on the Ravens coach. Well, I mean they love him, he loves them, Eisen replied to Rappaport. But they have been .500 here for a few years, and ever since Flacco signed that big deal, they haven't been back to the playoffs. Note, not true, of course, but once in 5 years. Correct, of course. Rappaport immediately dismissed the second guessing here, noting that the Ravens were right there, but, yeah no, as he trailed off on the thought, likely with nothing more to add to logic behind keeping Harbaugh. And that's exactly why teams are calling. The Ravens had a chance to make the playoffs up until the win, and in home game they lost on Sunday, as the team didn't show up in any facet until the second half, then faded once again as the fourth quarter got away from them late. As much as you can blame the play on the field, the coaching staff is a major reason for the downfall as well, not only in this game, but the entire that culminated in an 0-5 record versus playoff-bound teams, with a pair of home losses to sub-.500 teams in the Bears, 5-11, and the Bengals, 7-9. In Ellison's Late for Work, she goes on to use Harbaugh's extension, and the search for a new defensive coordinator, as a means to justify keeping the 10-year head coach in Baltimore for a 11th. There has been zero indication that owner Steve Bisciotti wants to part ways with the head coach he hired in 2008, however. The mere fact the Ravens are making calls about their defensive coordinator makes that clear. Plus, Bisciotti gave Harbaugh a contract extension before the 2017 began. A few issues with this line of logic here. First and foremost, if the Ravens weren't looking for a new DC after knowing that Dean Pease was absolutely retiring, that would quickly tip their hand as to their intentions. Considering Russell Street Report's own Tony Lombardi suggested Pease' retirement was impending weeks ago, it's likely that the team had been interested in Chuck Pagano well before the embarrassment in Week 17, which could have been a tipping point for Steve Bisciotti to truly consider parting ways with Harbaugh. Reaching out to a former Ravens DC is merely a smart move in the event Harbaugh is retained. October 22, 2017, Minneapolis, Minnesota, USA. Baltimore Ravens head coach John Harbaugh before the game against the Minnesota Vikings at U.S. Bank Stadium. Mandatory credit, Brad Rempel. USA Today Sports. As for John's extension through the 2019, let's look back at the previous regime in Baltimore, when Steve Bisciotti gave Brian Billick a 4-year extension on his contract, only to fire the coach 1 year later. Yes, Billick did have an abysmal 5-11 in his last year before being handed a pink slip, but this 2017 edition of the Ravens was, in my opinion, an Aaron Rodgers, Deshaun Watson, coupled with the aforementioned pair of home losses to some bad teams. The notion that Harbaugh isn't going anywhere seems a bit far-fetched for me. At the end of the day, if teams do start calling the Ravens about Harbaugh's availability, and the possibility of a trade is on the table, much like it was for the Saints when teams called about Sean Payton last offseason, the Ravens would be wise to listen. Whether or not Bisciotti believes John is the man to continue to ride out this 3-year playoff-less drought, it's become quite clear Harbaugh's welcome has worn out in Baltimore among the fans in the seats, or those Bisciotti wants back in the seats, and those tuned in at home.